I've pulled up the great MA function here on this Bloomberg, and you can see the dramatic fall in M&A activity here as we went through the quarters of 2016. It sort of peaked there late last year, and look at that drop. Now, the first reaction would be, well, that makes a lot of sense given the geopolitical instability, given the oil price volatility, but you're saying it has nothing to do with that.
I mean, in terms of global M&A activity, a big part of the drop is driven by sentiment and also expectations around interest rates. Because in terms of the huge surge in volumes the last few years, particularly last year, to a large extent still the very low interest rates globally are driving the financing of these mega deals and mergers, particularly in the US, and the availability of cheap financing. So as the expectations of the Fed rate hike increased, that you reduce the appetite of business leaders to proceed with very large transactions.
So what kind of an impact has the lower oil price had? I mean, it's affected sentiment clearly, and one would argue that that's reflected as well in the M&A activity. But isn't there a counterside to the argument that M&A activity could increase because of that push to consolidate from a state level?
In terms of the region, definitely there is an impact of the lower oil price on sentiment, transactions, the pricing of the stock market, and M&A as a consequence. On the other hand, it's true that we're seeing a move towards consolidation. So there are a couple of large transactions happening in Abu Dhabi on the back of that. And I think this is what we call a perfect storm, i.e., more difficult economic conditions pushing the governments to take difficult decisions and actually do the right thing.
Ziad, when you just mentioned a couple of M&A deals in Abu Dhabi, probably looking particularly at the financial services side of things there, but what about when you look at it regionally, which industry groups are ripe for consolidation in your view?
By far, the financial services industry in our region is the most fragmented and the one that requires the most consolidation. What stands in the way of that is, in some cases, the politics around the region within countries, and definitely between countries, because what really you would expect to see in a region like the GCC is the emergence of a handful of mega banks, which would be better capitalized, much stronger, and much more able to serve their customers, both retail and corporate customers, like you've seen in Europe or in the US.
Yeah, I mean, but are there difficulties here? Okay, we can look at individual countries, but what about cross-border consolidation? Is there much evidence of that picking up?
Cross-border is going to be very difficult because of the reluctance of the regulators in each country to allow cross-border merger between the banks.
Which country is going to see more activity now as we sort of chase the later part of the second half of the year? Is it United Arab Emirates? Is it Saudi Arabia? I mean, where would you expect a spur of activity?
The two countries which by far lead activity in our region are the UAE and Saudi Arabia, with UAE actually often being ahead. For the rest of the year, I would expect more activity to be coming out of the UAE, and hopefully some transactions which are already in the market being announced and closed.
Well, absolutely. When I talk about cross-border, I'm not just talking about regionally there, which was my primary question, but what about foreigners from other parts of the world looking at attractive targets there amongst GCC countries, for instance? Is that just a no-go?
We're definitely seeing some of this. As you discussed earlier in the show, the valuation differential between emerging markets and developed markets is at a very high level. And definitely the Middle East is an area where we see very relatively depressed valuations relative to Western Europe and the United States in particular. So we see some of that, but there are still obstacles to this cross-border acquisitions. Some of them are regulatory related, and the other one is pretty simply that there is a scarcity of good companies of a large enough size that would make them attractive for big international companies. And by good companies, we mean well-managed, well-run, well-governed, which would be attractive enough for a top global player to pay up for them.